Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Angela Ward. I'm a registered nurse, transformation coach, and the CEO of Guardian at the Gateway, where we help people that are struggling from burnout and overwhelm to reclaim their wholeness, their wellness, their passion and purpose in life. I am really excited that tonight I have an incredible person I just adore who is joining me to discuss the journey home, untangling the cords of childhood trauma with Mr. Mike Nash. I will tell you a little bit more about him in a moment, but first, just a little bit of housekeeping. So, we are anticipating talking for about an hour or so, about 45 minutes of just kind of sharing his experience with you. And then at the end, we'll have time for some questions and answers. So, if you're watching this live on Facebook or on YouTube, you can leave comments, especially if you can give StreamYard permission. It will let me see who you are, and we'll try to respond to those questions. But I also have a great list myself. And also, if you're watching live, please put some comments in, some hearts, emojis, some likes, all of those things that we know that you're here. It's always helpful to have a little, engagement and know that you're around. So thank you for joining us live. Um, what other things can I tell you? Also, if you watch this replay, the replay will be posted. So if you want to watch it later, please just put replay in the comments or any thoughts or ideas that come to mind. So, are you ready to talk about this topic? So, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that we might be talking about some intense stuff. Please have some water nearby. Make sure that you're in a place that you can take care of yourself and feel safe. And one thing that I truly love about Mike is his sense of humor. So even though it might be a little intense at times, I promise you that we have a little bit of a silliness between us. So, which leads me to his introduction. So I would like to share that Mike sent me a very complicated bio, which was full of guess what is true and what is not true. So it's very fun, and I'm not going to read you all of it. I'm going to do my own personal editing here, and I'll tell you a little bit about Mr. Michael Nash, who is currently 55 years old, twice married, both times to the same person, the father of 4, and an organizational development consultant and the founder and president of Nash Consulting, which is a mid-sized consulting firm serving organizations big and small for the past 25 years. Hobbies include, let me make sure I'm reading these and there's nothing sneaky in here. Okay. Piano playing, which I know is true. He's an amazing piano player. Writing music, painting, hiking, and traveling. He has previously worked in the field of social work and, along with his wife, has fostered parented 5 children and adopted 1. He and a group of friends partnered with colleagues in Liberia to open a school that now educates 1,200 students and employs 45 educators and staff. He likes pina coladas and getting caught in the rain. His first grandchild is coming in February. So life looks pretty great for Mike. Oh, also he has a puppy. So what else could be going on? The thing that's really remarkable about Mike is he experienced very significant childhood trauma from the ages of about 2 years old to 16 years old, and has been learning to thrive despite the ongoing painful journey of recovery. And I've been honored to walk with him on part of this journey as part of his team. So please give some hearts and likes and emojis as we bring Mike on. All right. Hi, Mike. Anything you want to add to that?
Thank you for that intro. You left out the part that I was on the first manned space shuttle to the moon, and I was in NFL and in Congress. But that's right.
Oh,
you got all the true stuff. You got all the true stuff. So
I mean, it's hard to believe that all the things that you've accomplished. I mean, truly. I think that's really amazing. And also, I, in my own experience, have noticed about people that have childhood trauma, they seem to be, or at least the people that I know, have accomplished a lot in their life, which is surprising in a way. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and what's inspiring you to openly discuss complex PTSD and childhood trauma with the world?
Well, I will. Thank you, Angela, and again for that great intro. You got kind of the highlights there as far as me. I have an awesome family. I live in a little town called Plain, in the middle of Washington State. I don't know if anyone has heard of Plain, but it's a beautiful little town. Been working in organizational development consulting work for about 25 years. And we have a team of 10, and I just think we're doing great work. You mentioned the school we're running in Liberia. Some really good stuff. With all that, I have carried really significant pain my entire life. And I didn't really understand it, or really begin to seriously heal from it, probably till about 10 to 15 years ago, started my journey. I'm doing this, I think, to answer the second part of your question. Living with childhood trauma and what is called actually c-ptsd, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, is extremely lonely. It is, you spend your entire life both wanting to be seen and understood, and knowing that it's and finding that it's impossible. So you're completely isolated within this cave that you're living in. You see no way out. And I guess I'm doing this because I want to, if I can make others' journey a little less lonely, if I can offer a little bit of hope, because I think hope is also something that is really hard to come by for people who are suffering with CPTSD.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And thank you so much for being courageous enough to talk about it. I think one thing that I've noticed is this sense of shame that a lot of people seem to carry with this experience, and how being just even talking about it seems like there's this piece of shame.
Absolutely.
What would you say? What is it exactly?
What is it? CPTSD. I should have said this in my who am I? I am not a clinical expert. I am not an academic expert in any of this. The only expertise I claim is I've lived with it for 55 years. And so it's a little hard for me to put some of this into words. But what it is it's a real toxic brew of being lost in a set of emotions that are so overpowering you can't even cope with them. You think of a little child who developmentally cannot handle what is going on around them. They developmentally don't have any way to contextualize or cope with the pain that they're experiencing, whether it's abuse or extreme neglect or whatever it might be. They don't know what to do with that, so they become lost in it and they get stuck in it. And you basically grow up stuck in that place where everything is intolerable. If you don't mind, can I just read you a really short paragraph? There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's
excellent book. Yeah,
it's just a fantastic book for anyone who's struggling with PTSD. I just came across this paragraph today, kind of an interesting description of what it feels like. He says, the crushing sensations in your chest that you may label as anxiety or depression. The fear of losing control, always being on alert for danger or rejection. The constant feeling of being unsafe. The self-loathing. The nightmares. The fog that keeps you from staying on task and from engaging fully in what you are doing. Being unable to fully open your heart to another human being. So it is this toxic brew of intense emotion that you couldn't cope with back then, but you stay stuck in it. So as an adult, you're lost in this brew. And I think what sets it apart maybe from other struggles is, I've shared with you before, Angela, that phrase, a fish doesn't know it's wet. Mm-hmm. I think the interesting thing about sufferers of CPTSD is until you start doing recovery and somehow get to the point where you're willing to start looking at what's happening, you have no idea that you're actually stuck in that, which sounds weird because it's so intense. And yet
lot of sense to me because, you know what I understand about fetal development and young child brain development physiologically is that conscious mind isn't really on board until a child 7, 8, 9, older. And so these messages that you're getting imprinted essentially
Yep.
prior, it become your truth, your reality.
Yep. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly it. And you're lost in it as an adult. Then you are, whether it's, fear or shame or whatever it is that you're struggling with, you acclimate to it, and you don't even realize, in a sense, that what you're living with is I guess is not normal, and so you're kind of stuck in it.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense to me. So, people that I've shared my story with, I have an adult diagnosis of PTSD. So I had an experience that was trauma as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that was challenging in us learning to work together was me
Mm-hmm.
understanding the differences of what your experience was versus mine. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to like what you understand the differences are between PTSD and complex PTSD.
Mm-hmm. I will, and I'm always a little reluctant on this piece because again, I don't understand the whole clinical range of what's going on here, and I don't know that I actually have PTSD, so I'm not sure how to compare it. But I will say this: I've talked to a lot of people who struggle with PTSD. Their struggles feel a little more episodic than what I struggle with. Here's one way to look at it, where a person with PTSD may experience a flashback, and that may feel extremely intense. And in those moments, the truth is completely backwards. They're suddenly they're back in a war, or suddenly they're re-experiencing everything they experienced during that terrible car wreck or whatever it was that happened to them. That happens, but then they, for the most part, can at some point be done with that flashback. Right, and look back on it as a flashback. And I think the difference with CPTSD is you're stuck in it. And you're, in a sense, I could say that I literally was in flashback most of my life, 24/7, living it, really, truly believing some things to be true that were not true. For example, feeling completely panicked for no reason at all. And I don't mean no reason, of course. There's lots of reason, but it's not a current reason. It's not a reality-based reason. But it doesn't change the fact that I would spend most of my life with my heart thumping and my chest hurting and this feeling of sort of, near panic, and just live in that, as opposed to going into a flashback and experiencing that and then coming out of it again.
Sure. So just for me, in my experience with a flashback, let's say, that's just easy words to understand, is something would trigger it. It would seem like there would be a trigger and a flare up.
Yes.
And it may last a period of time to even pack it back together, but it was still different than baseline.
Yep. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. And it seems like, because I think even using the word flashback when you describe it to me is a little tricky, because we have a cultural understanding that it's like, some Vietnam vet war thing, like this big dramatic thing, but it doesn't sound like that's what your experience of it is like. It's just running that nervous system.
Yep.
Always maybe on alert constantly, or
yes.
What else?
It has an element of confirmation bias to it, I've realized. Because in CPTSD, you're already convinced of certain things. For example, I remember sitting in a Starbucks one time, and this was when I'd started recovery, so I was a little more aware. And I looked around the Starbucks and realized I literally believe that every single person in this room hates me right now. And I have always felt that and believed it. I just didn't know I was feeling it and believing it until I started recovery. So that day I looked around and thought, wow, how weird is that? That is clearly not the case. And yet I've lived with this belief my whole life. And so I was living in that flashback, right, all those years. And I like what you said about, did you say baseline? Because I still would experience those waves of even more intense. Suddenly somebody looks at me wrong, and I'm, that's the trigger, and I'm completely being rejected. But the baseline was already that I'm already hated and rejected. Or I'm already in danger, for example. I'm already in danger. So when this one thing happens that's small, now I'm in panic. But my baseline is already dangerous.
Your baseline is already believing that's true about you, that everybody hates you and all this. And then you would have something that would exacerbate and prove
Confirm it. Yep.
thought patterns.
Yep.
I want to bring in a question that Ellie asked in the chat where and I feel like you're speaking to this a little bit, but can you describe the first time you felt or knew that you were actually healing and moving forward in recovery? Would you say it was that place, or was it?
No, that was a little into it. I would say the first time that let me read that again. First time you felt or knew that you were actually healing. Wow, that's a great question. I am going to say off the top of my head that it was a moment with my therapist. And it was this moment I'd been with him for, I'm going to say 3 years. And that might seem a little discouraging because it took that long for me to have this moment. And the moment was, this person cares about me. It was like a revelation. Like, I couldn't believe it. I for the first time believed it, which was just crazy. And it changed so much in that moment. And I actually remember that week, it might've been that day, but maybe it was that week. I remember being with my wife one evening that same week and having the same experience. And so it was like the intellectual belief that I was cared about. That wasn't all there was anymore. It actually sunk a little deeper. I actually, for the first time, trusted.
It was an embodied experience.
It was in my body. Yep. Yep. And I thought, okay, we're on the right track. If this is a taste of where I may be, and I'm so far beyond that now, but I remember that moment feeling for the first time a little bit of hope.
What were some other aha moments that you've experienced on this journey so far? Like maybe an insight or something that was really like pivotal.
That's great. I think one I would share is that when I got my head around what for me is sort of this trifecta, these 3 components of my c-ptsd, once I got those sorted, it was like a roadmap that started me on the right path. And I'm going to share what those 3 things are. And these are just mine. I don't want to say they're for everybody, but I would also say that I'm finding from talking to people that this is really a common experience, these 3 things. So number 1, I've mentioned, I think all 3 of these. Number 1 is just crazy fear, just living with fear of, fear of nothing, just the embodied feeling of fear, but also fear that the very next thing that happens, I won't be able to handle. Fear when I wake up in the morning that the day is going to be overwhelming and I'm not going to be able to handle it. Fear, just fear of everything. Number 2 is shame, which is I am just at heart, deep at my core, not a good person. I just an actual gut level belief that I'm not even barely human. I'm just not a good person. Number 3, what they call the abandonment depression, which is a really horrible stew of hopelessness and all the good things in your life. You can't get any nourishment from them. There's no happiness in those things. It's like depression, but it's actually, I've experienced depression as well. This is deeper than depression. It's almost like
say that feeling of like utter aloneness.
That's a part of it. Absolutely. Utter isolation, this sadness that actually just feels like your chest is just heavy with the kind of your stomach and your chest are just heavy with sadness and you carry it. It's not just episodic. You learn to live with that. So I think those 3, that's the sort of toxic triad for me that I think the aha moment that's connected with those things is figuring those out and starting to sort them and begin then to figure out where they came from and what their roots were. And that was such an important part of the journey, is to understand that where they came from. And this is key. None of it was my fault. And I can't even tell you how big that piece is. I still almost get teary with that concept that it wasn't my fault. And and getting your head around that is the beginning of dealing with the shame. Because it's the gateway to beginning to offer yourself self-compassion and self-advocacy, which is actually the most important part of the healing process. When you can begin to see those things as not your fault and then come alongside yourself and be your own advocate and be your own comfort. And in a sense, I know this sounds kind of corny, but learn to love that child, right? Learn to love the child that I was. That was a huge part of my journey and was near the beginning when I first started the work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That seemed like, happy to share a little bit that we've worked together with this. And I think that was a huge piece to even know that you were worthy of it,
Mm-hmm.
you know? What do you think those that are recovering or in this recovery process from complex PTSD would really most need to know?
Yeah, those that are in the recovery process.
Could have been helpful for you to know, maybe early on.
Well, so many things come to mind. I'm not alone, meaning that there's people out there who get this. I think that was huge. I actually spent my entire life with nobody up until I was probably in my 40s, to actually discover that there were people that even could get this, that understood it, that had experienced it. So I think that's one, is if there was some way to get some community around it. I think the it wasn't my fault, as I've shared, was a thing that I had to be told so many times before it started to sink in. I think maybe the concept, I think maybe just the hope that you will. I remember my therapist, probably 100 times had to reassure me that there actually was hope, that there was going to be progress. And I think that was a
Can
really
we speak to that a little bit? That's a great question, because someone I was talking with earlier today said, how can you ever heal trauma? And, in my lens, not exactly, because that's also like, you
Mhm.
know, the golden repair, like that's part of what makes us who we are. So how can one have hope in the face of never being able to completely heal the trauma? Or do you understand how I'm?
I totally do. That's actually one of the most profound, I think, movements in recovery, is you get to the point where, and it's kind of holding more than one thing at once. On one hand, I definitely have hope that I'm going to continue to heal. I know I'm right in the middle of my process right now. I know I'm going to continue to heal because I've already seen the progress. And I'll tell you what, I would say once a week in the last couple of years, once a week I have an experience of, oh my God, I don't feel X and Y anymore. That's amazing. I'm experiencing the joy of recovery. At the same time, I've learned some acceptance that has been really a long time coming. I am going to have these wounds for the rest of my life. And I am learning to do this interesting dance where you have this wound and this grief that you're going to carry, and it's something that not everybody carries. It's hard, and there's days where it's really, really hard. I'm going to probably have, let me rephrase it, I will have that for the rest of my life, and I can also learn to experience joy and the happiness of life, and I can experience thriving together with that, hand in hand. And I can have days where I focus a little bit more on the hard stuff, and I can have days where I'm able to really focus on the good stuff, but they're always there together. And I think
here's another quick question is, like, what are some of the hallmarks of thriving for you?
Whoa, that's a good question. Well, coming from a place of mid recovery, so I might have different answers for this later. Being able to wake up in the morning and either quickly or within an hour step out of the old and into the new, to actually be able to step out of the flashback, which I lived in flashback my whole life. So that to me is a miracle, to be able to, here's what happens with c-ptsd. You wake up every morning to the worst things that ever happened to you, because here's the hallmark of c-ptsd. It's always happening to you. It never stopped happening, right? So one of the hallmarks of recovery is, whoa, I can wake up and maybe be in that space, but step out of it, or maybe not wake up in it some days. So that's an amazing experience. I think that's one. Another one would be to start to trust and experience someone else's caring for you, and actually let it in, and actually let it into you. Kind of even that physical feeling of being cared about. That's relatively new for me. That's an amazing experience, and at the same time, it makes me profoundly sad when I experience these cool things, because I'm like, whoa, look at the years.
Yeah.
I missed that. And there's a kind of a for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Every time I experience a really cool new thing that I now get to have, it also shows me what I didn't have for a lot of years. And there's a lot of grief attached to that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really important point, I think, to make for people that are embarking on this path or have partners or
Mhm.
caring for people that are on this path, is the profound range that you seemed to or continue to experience of this joy of that you have it now, and yet how vital it was to be able to have space to grieve without falling into a hole somehow, without it
Yes.
being
Yes.
like overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that grieving. I'm glad you reminded me about that. I think I know that grieving, and if you read Pete Walker's book, c-ptsd, from Surviving to Thriving, and the Body Keeps the Score, you'll hear about this. But grieving itself is a really important part of the process. Giving yourself permission to grieve, and there's deep, deep, deep grieving. And what happens as you recover is the grieving isn't, you're not actually inconsolable. You actually can do the grieving at some point. You learn to grieve. You learn that it's safe to grieve. You learn that you're not going to die. Your heart's not going to blow up. All the stuff from the past isn't going to come back and just overwhelm you, and you're not going to die, right?
That seems like one of the really beautiful things that you've developed, was a capacity to self-soothe in a
Mm-hmm.
really nourishing way rather than in a numbing way or
Yep.
something. Like,
Oh, that's good. Yeah. One of the hallmarks of childhood trauma, adult sufferers of it, is that we're always looking for someone else to rescue us because we needed it. When we were young,
a thing.
yes, yeah, we needed a rescue. We needed a rescue as a child. We needed somebody to see us and rescue us, and we didn't get it. So we spend our whole lives looking for someone to rescue us and filling that pain with distraction and chemicals and other addictions and whatever else you can find, because it is inconsolable. It's too much to face all this pain. And so the self-soothing, that ability to grieve and to be your own advocate, and to instead of waiting for the person that you're partnered with or your therapist or someone else to save you, you learn enough, what's the word? Not just self-confidence. You learn enough, you trust yourself. You begin to trust yourself that you can be there for yourself.
Yeah, you develop skill sets that you would have learned as a young person had you been properly parented.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah.
You learn some techniques. Well, I mean, although I don't know, many people don't have self-soothing skills.
Right. Right.
But yeah, particularly that.
Yeah.
What do you think would be important for like partners and family members or people who love people that are in this process of healing? What's it helpful for them to maybe understand, or
Right. Right.
or what would have been helpful for you? I guess I don't want to speak for everybody, but maybe what would have been helpful for you?
Yeah. So if you're partnered with somebody with c-ptsd, I think it's really difficult. And I just want to say that probably one of the most important things you can know if you're partnered with somebody with childhood trauma is that, kind of parallel to what I said earlier, it's not your fault. Meaning that what's happening right now in the moment, the fact that your partner is accusing you of not loving them enough, your partner is extremely mad or hurt because you haven't met their need. In most cases, it's not your fault. You're not going to be able to meet those needs. And this is actually really key. You can't keep giving the person who is struggling with c-ptsd more love and more of these things and think that that is going to then heal them. It's not going to happen. You're just going to be pouring in, and it's not going to ever be enough to meet that need, because the need they had needed to be met way back then. It's not going to be met by you raising the volume on your love or your care. And so I think the c-ptsd partner can end up being on this vicious cycle of almost feeling gaslit all the time, like they're not doing something right. If they would just love the person more, if they would just be this way or that way, so they themselves can become very, start to have their own self-esteem damaged and feel helpless and like they're not good enough. And so you can really be hurt if you're in relationship with somebody with c-ptsd. So I think there's a lot of self-care and getting support. And I think understanding c-ptsd would be really important for a person who's partnered. So reading about it, learning about it, so they can find that healthy balance where they're, on one hand, yes, helping that person trust them, giving them the right messages. I'm here for you. I'm not going to go away, et cetera, but not taking on the responsibility of healing them.
Mhm. So many places I want to go with that,
Okay.
because there's so it's clear that a person recovering from complex PTSD, or at least speaking from what I know about you or a few other people I've worked with, is this piece around trust, particularly,
Mhm,
and boundaries.
mhm,
Um, and I wonder if you could maybe speak to that, like how to maintain healthy boundaries as either a care provider or as
mhm,
a partner, lover, family member,
mhm,
and still enhance that trusting process.
mhm. Oh boy, it is such a tricky balance. I picture maybe a situation where the partner is saying, um, Angela, I know you're hurt right now. I know you're angry. I want you to know that I love you. I'm not going to leave you. I'm here for you. Um, I also know that what's happening right here is mostly to do with you and what's happened to you and what you're telling yourself right now. I do love you. You don't think I do. Um, I can't prove it to you right now.
Mm,
I'm just going to continue to be steady in my love for you. I'm not leaving, but I'm
mhm.
also going to leave the room right now because I need some space, right? I mean, it's that sort of back and forth, right? Reminding the person that you're there, but also remembering that it's theirs
Yeah.
to work through, right?
And obviously, this conversation should probably happen not in the middle of the fight or whatever. Like maybe laying some groundwork would be really
It
helpful.
both. Yeah. In fact, that's a good reminder. When the person's not in their most triggered place, right? Have some conversation about the boundary piece. Because there's been the times when I haven't been at my worst, have had some of the best conversations with my wife about her, she and I. And I can go back and remember those when I need to. And then in the moment when it's terrible, it's good to be able to be reminded, right? So here's just a little example. My wife and I have a rule. If if she needs to go away because of something very intense, um, she can do that. And in fact, I want her to, but she also tells me she'll be back. The c-ptsd person needs to hear that. I'm not
Yeah.
being abandoned right now.
Mhm.
This is just for now, right? So it's that back and forth. It's messages of trust and support and love, but not getting sucked in and feeling like you have to fix the problem. It's a pretty tricky dance. I don't I think it's a big lift to be in relationship with somebody with CPTSD, but I think the best thing they can do is educate themselves about what
Yeah.
it really is.
Yeah, and I think support it'd be great if there was a little more support in the world. Are you seeing Laura's question in the chat
I am
here?
I am Laura. Yes.
Let's just read that out. Laura asked, if can you speak to the possibility of having complex PTSD and also then PTSD as the result of additional adult severe trauma and loss? Thank you for your important sharing.
Mhm. Yeah, my cognitive belief about that is I'm sure they exist simultaneously. I had just I'll give a minor picture of this. I had a near death experience several years ago on a mountain, and I had a fall the fall itself felt like it lasted for an hour, but it was only probably 10 seconds, and I broke several bones, and it was traumatic. But I think I had the seeds of PTSD from that for quite a while, and I think I noticed how that felt different than the CPTSD. So I would just say I'm sure they can layer. I'm sure they layer that way.
Yeah, and I'd like to speak to that really quickly too. Is in the second MDMA for PTSD trials that are being done or that were done recently, there was someone in the trial that was an Iraq War veteran that had PTSD. And as they did work with his PTSD, they discovered that he had severe childhood trauma.
Wow.
And I think frequently, I don't know, I shouldn't say frequently, I think that sometimes those wells of trauma don't really show up sometimes until there's adult trauma that you start
Yeah.
unpacking, but then it's like, oh, actually, it's
Yes.
a lot
Yes.
further down than that.
Yes.
Uh, so yeah, I mean, I would argue that there's trauma all over the dang world, which is part of why I felt motivated to bring this conversation to light in whatever way that I can. Yeah, it's all over the place, and we are resilient and can find our ways to healing if we get connected to one another, I think.
Something you just said, Angela, reminded me of how difficult it is to find the c-ptsd. I think it's all over, it's all around us. I like I said, I didn't know I had it, and I just lived with it. And I know it's covered up by addiction. It's covered up by crazy busyness. It's covered up by just really negative behaviors. You know, the trauma brain. It's covered up by extreme political or religious positions. It's covered up. I mean, you could just make a list of the things that people end up in as a covering that and not seeing it in the other stuff.
Despair and the grief, I think. Anything to avoid that overwhelming experience.
Right. And so we see it, and we see extreme behaviors all around us in this world. And I believe that a lot of the time that's covering probably some pretty deep childhood trauma.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
There's another really important component to this, and people with childhood trauma, they feel heartbroken, and they suffer from intolerable emotions in their stomach, in their chest, in their brain, and they spend their whole life doing their best to try to not feel those things. So they're just completely stuck. And something that is really important about recovery is what's called mindfulness. And I just want to bring that up. It's probably one of the most important aspects of recovery is learning to become in touch with your inner world and kind of learning the landscape and being able to look at what's going on and to be able to tolerate it. And that comes through learning to pay attention to your physical sensations, to your emotions. And that comes through the practice of meditation and mindfulness and, different practices. And that's been integral to my progress. And anyone that I've talked to who works with people with c-ptsd tends to believe that is a key to recovery. And so that's an early stage recovery piece where you just start practicing mindfulness, start practicing meditation. And what happens over time is you start to become not only aware of some of the things inside, but you find that you're a little bit more able to tolerate, and that can grow, and that can become, that becomes a really important part of recovery.
Mm-hmm. Ellie's asking, what type of therapy seemed to help you the most? Bunch of options there.
Would you read me all the initials? Because I don't even know what all those kind of therapies are.
EX, I don't know what that is. IFS, internal family systems, DBT, etc.
I feel like I did Whitman sampler so many things. So I will tell you just a quick list of what I've done. I've done, and I don't remember all the names of everything. So I definitely did IFS, internal family systems, and with my long-term current therapist, we've done some work on IFS. I've done some somatic work with a couple different providers, including Jed, and also another therapist who does somatic kind of body sensation and touch work. I've worked with some alternative medicines. I'll leave it there. I've worked with meditation and mindfulness, some talk therapy. I did a little bit of I forget the word for it now, where your brain is
cranial stuff.
It's the
neurofeedback.
Yes, neurofeedback. I did that for a little bit just to kind of see if I could bring things down, the anxiety level. I've done a lot of different things, and it's really hard to kind of rank.
Ketamine-assisted therapy.
Ketamine-assisted therapy, yeah, and they all it's hard. They're kind of apples and oranges, so they don't really line up. I think they all do their own thing. So as a group, they've all been incredibly helpful. Because some of those therapies are more about insight, some are more about hope, some are more about the physical. I don't know.
Can you speak to the importance of touch in this realm? Because I appreciate you mentioning Jed, my husband, who's a massage therapist and body worker, but to me, my impression was there was something about that type of connection that seemed really helpful.
Yeah, I think on a couple levels. One is there's so much of childhood trauma is carried in your body. And so I got to where I could find different things in my body. Like I know where my shame is. I know where my grief is. I know where my depression, I know now where all those things are. And I think that finding the location of those things and learning to pay attention to that led to me understanding where they were coming from, the stories that were behind them. It led to me being able to tolerate those things more, learning to move as a way of shifting some of those feelings around has been wonderful. Touch and just being touched, whether, just even if it's just massage or just being held, in a therapeutic sense has, I think there's been some sort of retroactive healing around that because of the extreme neglect and abuse that I experienced, right? There's sort of been some replacing going on, I guess, if a word for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's even some self, just like hand on chest. And, there's times where I do my meditation and I find the fear right here and I'm able to kind of touch that and offer some comfort. That's been a help.
Yeah, absolutely. So what does the journey home mean? The name of our talk, and what does that look like to you? How did we land on this?
Yeah, I remember we kind of went back and forth on a title. I think there's an aspect of recovery that is about finding yourself and coming home to this place. I mean, there's so much shame and self-hatred and fear that it's really scary to be present with yourself. And it's this ability to come alongside yourself and sit with yourself and get to know yourself again in a whole new light, to start believing the true things. So my 3 true things, which counter my 3 false things, right? I'm safe. That's huge for me. That's just mind blowing for me to finally believe I'm safe, to come home to that belief, that truth that I am safe. And what comes with safe is I'm not only safe, my mother's gone. I'm safe in my world. I'm also safe in the sense that I can handle today and tomorrow. I've handled a hell of a lot. I've handled more than a lot of people. I can handle what's going to come tomorrow. So there's a feeling of safety. Number 2, what's true is I'm a good person. That's taken me years to get to that, but that's true. That's coming home to me. I'm actually a good man. There's goodness inside of me. That's a coming home piece, right? I have enough. I can have happiness. I deserve happiness. I have permission to be happy. I have enough to be happy in my life. I can embrace happiness. That's coming home to self. So this whole feeling of sort of coming back to the little child I was, my unconditioned self, that little child I was before I was abused, right? Before I was neglected, before I had all these false beliefs. It's like coming back to that little boy and owning and joining with it again. I had this experience this last year. I went on a for me, it was a week-long solo backpack up in the mountains near me. And I just decided to be alone the whole time. And I was a little scared of that. But what I found probably after the second day and for the rest of the time, for the first time, probably because I've never done a solo hike for 10 days or for a week, but I really felt, I really enjoyed myself, like more than I ever had. I just enjoyed who I was that whole time. I really liked being with me. I remember one night literally laying in the tent thinking, I like the company here. Like, this is nice. And that's so new for me to actually feel that way about myself. So there's a coming home to myself, I guess. That's kind of a long answer to that, but
yeah. And I just want to say how powerful it was that you had found some poetry that spoke to you, Walt Whitman's The Open Road, and memorized that and spoke it as, like you didn't have the words.
Mm-hmm.
You were able to find poetry to make that be your truth. And it was so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
More questions coming in. And if anyone's watching and they have more questions they'd like to add, I think this is a great time to open the floor up. Of course, first, Mr. Jed Ward asks, how do you convince your nervous system that you are safe?
Well, first, Jed, that's a dumb question. Just
Don't
kidding.
shame him.
That's a joke. Jed and I get to play each other. So sorry, Jed. Just kidding you. That's a brilliant question. And Jed, you yourself actually have helped me with this one. How do you convince your nervous system that you are safe? It is one of the parts of this journey that you don't have as much control over. There's no switch. You can't talk yourself out of. So that is definitely, to me, more about somatic work and holding my chest and paying attention. That's the mindfulness comes to me here. Paying attention to what's happening inside. What we find in mindfulness practice is the more you pay attention and tolerate the terrible parts and actually hold those things and look at them, they start to dissipate. They start to lose their power. So I think it's a combination of some somatic work and some patience and some observation. And I don't want to leave out telling myself the truth, really working on what is true.
I'm going to ask Shelly's question in a moment, but I do have to say that Jed threw in Starbucks, and I kind of feel like since I was part of the Starbucks conversation, I think I need to just add that thread on real quick. Can you speak to the Starbucks?
I spent some time with Jed and Angela, and we had a really great session, and I learned a lot. And I if this is what you're talking about, Jed, I ended up texting you from Starbucks on my way home. And I just remember sitting there in Starbucks feeling really safe for the first time. And I think I wrote that to you. I'm in Starbucks, I'm safe, or I'm safe in, is that what I said? I'm safe.
I'm in Starbucks or something.
I'm in Starbucks and I'm safe.
Mantra that happened.
Like it should be their new slogan, you know? I'm in Starbucks and I'm safe.
Safe. Thank you. And I remember that being a bit of an aha moment for you as well.
Yeah. In fact, that morning, I remember this marveling at the feeling of safety and what it was. And this goes back to Jed's question. I felt it I felt the absence of this thing that I'd been carrying, this churning, this nervous. Here's a description of the lack of safety that I've thought of. It's like going down a roller coaster. It's that feeling you get on a roller coaster, but you know that it's broken at the bottom. So it's not just the fun of a roller coaster. It's the terror mixed with the gut level going downhill thing. Yeah, you carry that. For me, I've carried that lack of safety with me. And I remember sitting there at Starbucks that morning going, something's wrong. Something's missing. Oh my God, it's gone, right? You know, I'm not having that sensation. And it was, I think, one of the first times I can remember not having that sensation.
Yeah, I remember that was really beautiful. Let's go back to Ellie's question. Mm-hmm. Can you really know who you were before? It happens so early in life. How do you know?
Yeah, some of this, Ellie, is theoretical, and some of it's not. And I'll give you both. The unconditioned self. I was born an innocent, unconditioned little baby. I remember, and there's some memory here too, even though I can't obviously remember all of this. I remember being maybe 3, and I remember how curious I was and how much I loved exploring. I can kind of remember some of that. But there's a theoretical part of just knowing I was an innocent little child, and I can come home to that. Before I was conditioned to believe that before I was rejected, before I was hurt, before I was abused. Now, for me, my abuse, I believe, didn't start until I was probably about 2. So I think I really did have a couple years of safety. And so I can believe that to be true because knowing my history, I think that's true. So I can kind of rest on that. Also, through some of my medicine and some of my meditation work, I've actually gone back and remembered some things. I've remembered some feelings of pre-abuse. I've remembered some feelings of safety. So I think it's a matter of just having some faith that there was an unconditioned self at one point, and I can come home to that.
I think it was helpful too that you found some young photos. Like you found that one beautiful picture of yourself as a youngster with this big grin, and
yes,
you were able to kind of maybe through IFS work, whatever, kind of reclaim this sweet little boy.
Yeah.
And then I just want to also say, as a birth worker who has been at, I can't tell you how many births, all babies come in innocent and beautiful and perfect, and sweet. And there's not a thing wrong with any of them, no matter how they come out. So I know that in my own truth to be true.
Yes.
And so if you can't believe that for yourself, I can believe that for you.
Yeah, that's good. That's well put.
Some other questions. Tree just shared beautiful description of coming home to yourself. So thank you.
Thank you, Tree.
And then Julie asks, going back a little bit, how did you find anxiety and grief, etc., in your body? And I want to maybe tag onto this a tiny bit because
Mhm.
something I have been noticing with people is that I think that in this overwhelming feeling sensation, people compress it so much that they get numb
Mhm.
some ways.
Mhm.
And yeah, just kind of adding that piece on.
Mhm. Yeah, I do. Not only do you get numb, you end up with a lot of other physical aches and pains and things that are kind of distracting, I think, from the core stuff. So your body keeps the score. I'm going to mention that again.
I put it in the chat.
Yeah, you did. Yes, you did, or you did.
I
Okay.
did.
Okay. That would be a fantastic book to start to discover the physiological, the physiology. What's the word? Physiology of it.
Yeah.
The physiology of it, right? Because there's actually, and Jet's talked about some of this. I mean, there really are, muscles that are known to uh, hold these various emotions. And so, for example, a lot of people feel fear up through their neck, up through this area right here, upper chest and neck and jaw, right? That's not uncommon because there's actually, I don't know the name of the muscle, but there's a muscle there that actually, does that. So learning some of that has been helpful for me. Mindfulness practice has really helped me to start to notice it. So I have found that this feeling of shame, which is the worst of all those feelings to me of the three that I've talked about, is right in my sternum. And I can feel it when it's there. And sometimes I can trace it to the past. I can trace it to the present. I found that fear is much more in my chest. So I think to me, it's about paying attention and practicing mindfulness.
Well, how did you find it in the first place? Like, did you experience numbness prior to this exploration, or excuse me, or have you always kind of known that those are the places that you felt, or?
No, it was not so much numbness, but it was a hodgepodge of just feeling shitty. Just there was no differentiation. It was just my whole body felt sick and kind of heavy and achy, I guess. So it was all muddled. And so I think it was a matter of starting to separate. And I think it was because as I would work on a certain aspect of my trauma, you would start to notice changes in maybe that particular area.
I definitely remember you working with different places and how they shifted over time.
Mm-hmm.
And especially as you were willing to engage and be curious with those places.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that seemed to be pretty powerful to notice that they weren't going to go away, but they might morph, change, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, first you begin slowly to tolerate it, and then it begins to shift and dissipate. That's the pattern, and it can be a little bit. It takes a fair amount of patience because you can spend a lot of time tolerating some terrible feelings and learning to look at them and sit with them, and it's not going away, and it's actually more painful than it used to be because now you're looking at it and you're.
That's a really important thing to point out, is that people that are embarking on this healing work, it's kind of gets worse before it gets better.
Amen. Yeah, amen. This is not for the faint of heart. It's a difficult journey because it hurts like hell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are people that can love you through it.
Yes. Yes. And there's something to say too, Angela, is having a team, having your peeps, it's something that, I didn't really give myself permission to have in the past, or I was dying for people to save me. So I would latch onto these relationships and then kind of break the relationship because I was asking too much, right? To actually have this balanced relationship with people that are willing to help me is vital.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Another question, Momo Joe 3 is asking, can you speak to intergenerational trauma?
Not expertly, but I can tell you that I've had some really interesting conversations with one of my children about this. We've had some really interesting conversations with my oldest daughter, and she and I have had some great conversations about both the inherited possibility of intergenerational trauma that just is not directly transmitted, but is just inherited, through whatever it's inherited through, coupled with the fact that these children, even though I stopped the cycle, like I didn't abuse them or neglect them, I love them, but they still were there as their dad dealt with his own trauma and his own defense mechanisms and his own ways of responding and reacting. And so they experienced their own version of it and have had to do some work as well. So I believe in intergenerational trauma. I think it's a thing. My daughter herself has actually read quite a bit about this, and she talks about it as like 13 generations. So.
Gabor Mate speaks of this quite a bit in his work, but there's evidence, of course, the epigenetic expression of trauma, simply things like releasing different cortisol levels and how our body's sensitized to different things in utero. So it's absolutely it's a real thing.
Yep.
And it takes some generations to heal, I think.
Yep. I really do.
We have another really great question here from Jolene. Oh, here, I'm going to put it up here so it's a little easier for us both to read. I've had c-ptsd from a very young age too, and found myself in dangerous situations, and have pushed past what is safe, and also in emotionally abusive relationships. Do you think this is part of it as well?
Absolutely. It is. And that's actually in the literature about this as well. People with c-ptsd tend to be at risk for everything you can think of people can be at risk for, including drug use and suicide and addiction, but they also tend to put themselves in dangerous situations. And that's actually, when I first read that, I thought, oh my gosh, that's why as an adult, I've broken 12 bones. That's why I crash my motorcycle and fall off mountains. And there's part of that part of me that I like, because I like the fact that I'm adventurous and I take risks, and, I live on the edge a bit. I like that, but I also can see why that has been a bit of a result of some of my early trauma. And when you look at the literature on this, it's a little bit fuzzy. Is it a death wish? Is it not caring about yourself? Is it just wanting to feel the excitement of danger? Is it, there's a lot of different maybe theories as to why people put themselves in those situations. But yes,
it's really interesting if you spend a lot of your life compressing feelings, that you kind of need a big feeling to feel something.
That's exactly right. And I, as an adult, as an adult and a teenager, I was addicted to feeling because I didn't want to feel. And so it's very crazy. Like I could not afford to feel what was really going on, because it would kill, I felt like it would kill me. It was overwhelming. I couldn't go there. So instead I wanted to feel everything else.
Yeah. I think that's great. I'm also, I feel like we could talk hours and hours about this. It also feels really related to the adverse childhood experiences study and resiliency scoring. And there's evidence, of course, that people with higher CP or higher ACE scores absolutely have all of this evidence that you're speaking of. Yes, Isla, there is going to be a recording so you can watch. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But Mike, I feel like we should probably get wrapping up here. But I'd love to know, like, what's next for you? Going on next for you?
Well, in a simple sense, I would say just stay on the road. I'm continuing my healing work. I've got about an hour every morning I spend doing my work. I'm experimenting now with just really experiencing joy. I'm looking for opportunities to have really healthy joy in my life. So that's kind of a cool new thing I'm focusing on. Work is going great. I've started a podcast, which you and I have talked about, Angela. So I am on my third episode. It has not been released yet, but an episode PTSD and me. Yes, there it is. c-ptsd. And that's also an email address for me, c-ptsdandmepodcast@gmail.com. Myself and a therapist friend of mine are collaborating together on this podcast that covers all these topics, covers healing and I'm going to go into marriage and raising kids as a person with c-ptsd. We're going to talk about psychedelics and meditation and therapy and all sorts of things. So that's a podcast that's hopefully coming out in 2021.
Please email this address so you guys know when Mike's podcast is going live, and I will also promote it, of course. I'm really excited about that for you.
Thank you very much.
I don't know if you saw in the chat that a dear friend of mine, Nora, is in Leavenworth, and she would love to connect with you. And I would love that kismet to happen. Beautiful, beautiful soul. And I think you're going to have an amazing time. So,
Laura, let's do it.
Yeah, let's have more of these conversations. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you,
If you guys have other questions, you can post it in the Facebook message or on YouTube, and we'll try to get to those. And then I want to just make a little announcement about next week before we sign off. I am going to be offering next Wednesday a Disrupt the Disruptor workshop at 6 p.m. on the 16th. I'm going to put a little link here where you can join. Basically, it's talking about some steps to help quiet that little voice in there that likes to disrupt you on these patterns. So maybe some skills that will help you
Thanks.
out. Yeah, so message me or join there as it goes past to find out more. Um, yeah. Well, I've really appreciated this time. Oh, and here comes my dog saying, "It's time to have dinner." We are
Okay.
all puppy lovers around here, so maybe we should wrap it up, and I hope maybe we can go deeper. Maybe next time we can get some more questions from people that are listening. What was helpful? Where you'd want to know more information. I'm sure people will be excited to hear your podcast, and me too.
Thank you, Andrew. This has been really good. And by the way, you are really good at this.
Oh, thank you. Well, I love talking to you, so it's all good.
It's awesome.
We could go blah, blah, blah. All right, my friends. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. And we will maybe come back with another talk soon. So blessings. Have a beautiful day and sign up for this little talk next week. I'd love to have you. All right. Bye, everybody.